Welcome to the Forgotten Crimes, where we uncover the darkest and most chilling stories from criminal history. In today's episode, we dive into the twisted life of Jeffrey Dahmer, one of the most notorious serial killers of our time. Imagine meeting someone seemingly ordinary, a quiet neighbor, a friendly stranger. Now imagine that same person, behind closed doors, committing some of the most horrifying crimes in human history. This is the chilling story of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal who not only killed but dismembered and even consumed his victims. How did this quiet, unassuming man become one of the most notorious serial killers ever? Stay with us as we take a dark dive into the life and terrifying crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was a man whose crimes shocked the world in both their cruelty and in the sheer number of victims: 17 men and boys, murdered between 1978 and 1991. What made his case so infamous wasn't just the murder count, but the brutal way in which he disposed of his victims. Cannibalism, necrophilia, and dismemberment were just part of his dark and twisted modus operandi. Today we'll explore who Jeffrey Dahmer was, what led him down this terrifying path, and how his reign of terror came to a shocking end. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. From the outside, Dahmer's early life appeared relatively normal. However, beneath the surface, there were signs that something was very wrong. As a child, Dahmer showed an unusual interest in dead animals, even dissecting them and preserving their bones, an early red flag that hinted at his future actions. Dahmer was also isolated as a child, growing up in a home filled with tension due to his parents' tumultuous marriage and eventual divorce. His father later admitted that they had missed some of the warning signs, including Jeffrey's fascination with death and his growing alienation from society. Dahmer's development may have been influenced by a combination of genetic factors and early life experiences. There are suggestions of a possible genetic predisposition to mental illness and a family history of psychological issues. Additionally, his feelings of abandonment and social isolation during childhood might have contributed to his later difficulties in forming healthy relationships. Jeffrey Dahmer's grandmother's house was a significant location in his life, especially during his early criminal activities. His grandmother, Catherine Dahmer, lived in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This house became a key location for Dahmer's crimes in the early 1980s. The house was a modest, single-family home situated in a residential neighborhood. It was a typical suburban house with a small yard and was not particularly notable except for its connection to Dahmer's criminal activities. Dahmer lived with his grandmother from 1981 to 1989 after being discharged from the army and before moving to his own apartment. He chose to live with her partly to escape his troubled past and his own growing issues with alcohol and criminal behavior. The house was used by Dahmer to lure and kill some of his victims. His grandmother was largely unaware of his criminal activities during this period. After living with his grandmother, Dahmer moved to 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213, in Milwaukee. This apartment became the primary location for his crimes during the latter part of his killing spree. The apartment was a standard, somewhat run-down building in a predominantly working-class neighborhood. The apartment was where Dahmer committed the majority of his murders. It was in this apartment that he engaged in his most gruesome acts, including dismemberment and, in some cases, necrophilia and cannibalism. Several of Dahmer's intended victims managed to escape from him. These escapes were crucial in ultimately leading to his capture. Tracy Edwards, perhaps the most famous survivor. On July 22, 1991, Edwards managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment. Edwards was handcuffed by Dahmer but managed to break free after a struggle. He flagged down two police officers and led them back to Dahmer's apartment. This led to the discovery of evidence that confirmed Dahmer's criminal activities, ultimately leading to his arrest. While not an escapee in the traditional sense as he was killed, Stephen Hicks was Dahmer's first victim. His death set the stage for Dahmer's later crimes. Hicks was lured to Dahmer's home with the promise of alcohol and companionship. Dahmer bludgeoned him to death and later dismembered his body. There was another victim who was drugged but managed to escape from Dahmer's apartment in 1989. Dockstader managed to flee the scene, though he did not report the incident to authorities. His escape demonstrated Dahmer's dangerous tendencies and the risk he posed. Dahmer's killing spree came to an end only when law enforcement discovered the full extent of his crimes due to the escape of Edwards and the evidence found in his apartment. The grim details of his crimes, including his murders and subsequent acts of necrophilia and cannibalism, were uncovered during this investigation, leading to his arrest and eventual conviction. These elements provide a window into the life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, illustrating the circumstances that contributed to his capture and the tragic impact of his actions. Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978 at the age of 18, just after graduating from high school. His first victim was Stephen Hicks, a hitchhiker whom Dahmer lured to his family home under the pretense of having a few drinks. When Hicks attempted to leave, Dahmer bludgeoned him with a dumbbell and strangled him to death. This killing would set the tone for the future as Dahmer dismembered Hicks' body and scattered the remains. Though this first murder left him shaken, Dahmer managed to evade capture and went on with life for nearly a decade before killing again. During this time, he struggled with alcoholism, drifting through jobs and military service. Dahmer's crimes were often committed while he was under the influence of alcohol, which suggests a potential link between his substance abuse and his violent behavior. It is possible that his alcohol use exacerbated his existing psychological issues and impaired his decision-making abilities. Dahmer's second murder occurred in 1987, marking the beginning of a 4-year killing spree. Between 1987 and 1991, Dahmer's methods grew increasingly brutal. He would frequent gay bars and lure young men back to his apartment with promises of money or alcohol. Once inside, Dahmer drugged his victims, strangled them, and carried out disturbing rituals involving dismemberment, necrophilia, and cannibalism. In some cases, he preserved parts of their bodies as trophies. As his crimes escalated, Dahmer attempted to experiment with even more gruesome techniques. He began trying to create zombies out of his victims by drilling holes into their skulls and injecting acid or boiling water. His goal was to create living, mindless companions who would never leave him. Dahmer's apartment was a macabre nightmare. When police eventually searched his home, they found skulls, bones, and human remains in the refrigerator and freezer. There were also Polaroid photographs he had taken during the dismemberment process, detailing the grotesque way he treated his victims after death. Dahmer's killing spree continued because of his ability to blend into society. He was quiet, polite, and seemed like an ordinary man to those around him. But the truth was far darker, hidden behind the closed doors of his apartment in Milwaukee. What makes Dahmer's case even more tragic is the number of times he nearly got caught but didn't. One of the most heartbreaking missed opportunities came in May 1991, just months before his final arrest. A 14-year-old boy named Konarek Sinthasomphone managed to escape Dahmer's apartment after being drugged and assaulted. He was found wandering the streets, disoriented and naked. Neighbors called the police, but when officers arrived, Dahmer convinced them that Sinthasomphone was his intoxicated boyfriend, and they let him take the boy back to the apartment. Hours later, Dahmer killed the boy. This incident raised serious questions about the negligence of law enforcement, particularly because the victims were often people of color and from marginalized communities. Dahmer's reign of terror came to an end on July 22, 1991, when one of his would-be victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape. Edwards ran out into the street and flagged down 2 police officers. When they returned to Dahmer's apartment, they were confronted with the shocking evidence of his crimes: photographs of dismembered bodies and the remains of his victims. Dahmer was arrested on the spot, and during questioning, he calmly confessed to all of his murders in great detail. The police and public were horrified by the extent of his crimes, and the case quickly gained international attention. During his trial in early 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to the 15 counts of murder he was charged with. However, the court ruled that he was legally sane and fully aware of his actions. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, ensuring that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. While in prison, Dahmer reportedly found religion, expressing remorse for his crimes. However, many found it difficult to believe that someone capable of such inhuman acts could truly feel remorse. Jeffrey Dahmer's time in prison was short. On November 28, 1994, he was beaten to death by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin. Scarver attacked Dahmer while they were cleaning a bathroom and used a metal bar to bludgeon him to death. Dahmer was pronounced dead an hour later. Some people saw his violent death as a form of justice for his victims and their families, while others questioned whether Dahmer should have been better protected, even after everything he had done. Jeffrey Dahmer's story is one of the darkest chapters in criminal history, a grim reminder of how evil can hide behind an unassuming facade. His horrific crimes continue to haunt the public consciousness, not only because of their brutality but because of the deep questions they raise about law enforcement, the vulnerability of certain communities, and the terrifying reality of human behavior. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true crime content. What other cases would you like to see us cover? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned for our next story of crime and mystery.